And Connie was superintendent of the Philadelphia Public Schools for a period of time. And she left a very strong and powerful legacy, and people look back when Coach Lytle was around when Connie was superintendent, was working in that. Last year, actually, Connie was here with us for this lecture series. I got to know her, and we've been trying to involve her in our work. She's still very vibrant and alive, and a wonderful educator. So this this lecture series is in honor of Connie, and I'm Andy Porter. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Education. We're very pleased and proud to convene this. I want to thank my friend and colleague Diana Slaughter-Cole here, who handles this lecture series and recruits, identifies and recruits our speakers. We have some co-sponsors that I would like to recognize for this year's lecture. The Center for Africana Studies, the Department of Psychology, Lincoln University, National Center on Fathers and Families, and the Netter Center for Community Partnerships. So on behalf of the Graduate School of Education, I'll just turn this over to Howard Stevenson, who's going to introduce our speaker, the esteemed and our very favorite Margaret Beale Spencer.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. I have to say that this is not a goodbye, even though it's very hard for me to do. And that's why I had to write all of this down. Dr. Spencer will be going to the University of Chicago in January to change the world from the Midwest. To see someone so special leave our presence, who has given her heart and soul and passion to everything she does, is not easy. And we know she is not really leaving us, as she reminds me every day. But I want to introduce Margaret to you with both a sense of loss and joy first. First, what you may already know, as you can read, that Margaret Beale Spencer has been the Board of Overseers Professor of Education and Professor of Psychology through the Graduate School of Education here at Penn since 1993. She has a PhD in Child and Developmental Psychology from the University of Chicago, has published over 100 articles since 1973, 3 edited volumes, and received funding for more than 36 research proposals from foundations and federal agencies. In addition to her numerous appointments on editorial boards, Dr. Spencer has been involved in the creation of 2 centers on Penn's campus. One entitled Changes, which stands for Center for Health, Achievement, Neighborhood Growth, and Ethnic Studies, and the other, the W.B. Du Bois Collective Research Institute. I'm happy to say that both will continue to exist even as she moves to the University of Chicago, and is one reason why she is not leaving. Her awards are numerous and include receiving the Senior Career Award for Distinguished Contributions to Psychology in the Public Interest in 2005, becoming a fellow in AERA, the American Education Research Association, and recently awarded the Fletcher Fellowship, which recognizes work that furthers the broad social goals of the United States Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education decision of 1954. So this is the academic Dr. Spencer. What you may not know is how Dr. Spencer got to Penn. When John Fantuzzo, another GSE colleague, faculty colleague of ours, and I went searching for Margaret Beale Spencer in 1991, we did not use the internet. We got on a plane and we went to her spot in Atlanta, where she was a full professor at Emory University. And in talking with John about his recollection of that visit, he recalls that we decidedly did not go to Atlanta to give her a sales pitch. And we did not want to appear desperate so as to scare her away. Actually, I tried not to appear too desperate. Inside, I was very desperate and tempted to respond otherwise. Instead of talking to Dr. Spencer about Penn from the conversational perspective, like, oh, what a great opportunity this might be, I had to play down and keep myself from the more impassioned and frantic voice within me that wanted to simply get down on my knees and say, please, baby, please, baby, please. I, at that time, was an assistant professor in a tenure-track position in GSE, where in 1992 there were no tenured faculty of color at the Graduate School of Education at Penn. Only Vivian Gadsden and I were here as faculty of color on the horizon. And while Vivian Gadsden, also untenured at the time, could and does move mountains by herself, I thought then, wouldn't it be nice if we had our own mountain? But we played it cool, and John recalls the meeting took place in a restaurant. I believe somewhere in suburban Atlanta, a clandestine bistro of fine foods, as I recall, with a low-lit, secretive, but amber atmosphere. John remembered that Margaret was initially formal and proper, making clear that this was a discussion, not a promise, but a conversation, not a guarantee. But after a while, he noticed that the conversation moved from customary academic pleasantries to playful imagination. And this, in my mind, typifies what Margaret is special, what makes her special. Despite her amazing research track record that has helped to shape the lives and careers of numerous researchers and social activists, that has challenged psychology's racial amnesia and denial of the role of race, gender, ethnicity, and culture in the human development of children and adolescents. Despite all this power, this lady, this mountain of strength and fortitude, cannot avoid a moment to debate. She cannot avoid a moment to imagine the possibilities or to brainstorm a good idea or to teach you about how to integrate human development in your everyday life. Whether it's about the presidential election or your child, Margaret loves to problem solve. Whenever I would tell her of my son's current life experiences, she would invariably say, Howard, leave that boy alone. You see, what he's doing is he's making meaning, and then she would go give me chapter and verse about some trinket of developmental wisdom that I am so glad to get. And the rest is history, thanks to John and others, and Marvin Laverson, who had the vision enough to follow this search all the way through. If you really want to get to know Margaret's passion, you must come correct and not come half-stepping. Start with a good idea and debate her. Like a mountain, she truly loves to battle the elements of academic knowledge with challenging ideas, standing tall enough to stretch what we as a research or education community can do for the well-being of children. I believe in her mind, body, and soul, in the very sweat that flows off her furrowed yet determined social justice brow. There is one enduring motto that guides her path, and it's all about the children. As she speaks to us on the topic of youth identity and development in the colorblind American context, post-Brown 1954, please welcome Dr. Margaret Beale Spencer.
Thank you so much. I am very humbled by that introduction, Howard. Thank you very, very much. I am really moved. I really, really appreciate it. Howard has been a very, very special colleague and friend from day one, and he's made these 15 years here at Penn very, very special on multiple levels. And the same applies to, with many of you. I feel so much dissonance, one of my favorite words, as my students know, at this moment. But I am incredibly appreciative of those lovely, lovely, lovely remarks, and I am moved, so I have to keep myself together. Help me, family. Thus, good afternoon. I will begin my remarks with several acknowledgements. First of all, of course, Howard. I extend sincere thanks also to Dean Porter for his remarks this afternoon, and of course, Dr. Howard Stevenson for the very warm and highly valued introduction. Additionally, I am sincerely appreciative to Dr. Diana Soter-Defoe, representing the members of the Clayton Lecture Selection Committee. Diana continues to be the creative talent and force supporting the highly valued Clayton Lecture Series. And I also thank all the co-sponsors of this event. You're certainly just making this point in my life a much more distance producing, but I am sincerely appreciative. Most heartfelt also, I recognize my family since both collectively and individually, each of you continues to serve as incredible sources of support, inspiration, and unconditional love, and for which I remain eternally grateful. I'm especially appreciative to my husband for his consistent support and patience during quite a few years of marriage, since he continues to be, no more numbers, honey, the number's too high. Since he continues to be my dry-humored, especially brilliant and patient best friend, Dr. Charles L. Spencer. I value the attendance also today in support of our creative and accomplished adult children, Terza, Tasha, and Chaz. Although son-in-law Carrington and our almost one-year-old grandson Kofi can't be here today, they're here in spirit, so I want to acknowledge them also. As family, your unfolding human development has always spawned my programmatic research efforts, so it's you who's basically undergirded my wings always. So let me make sure I get this technology right, Mr. Washington, so thank you too. He's awesome. He's my tech man. Okay. The decades of scholarship have benefited from a variety of funding sources and highly valued collaborations. I also acknowledge the many valued student collaborators who have become valued friends and colleagues, the many mentees in my University of Chicago cohort even still continue to provide valued friendship and intellectual sustenance. I continue to benefit from many collaborating partners with whom I engage in the application of this scholarship into programming, training, and practice in support of our children. The work is too nuanced and complex to achieve as a solo investigator. Thus, the many collaborations and collaborators continue to be respected and highly valued, and they need to be acknowledged. In preparing for this lecture, I organized my remarks into 3 sections. Thus, first, I will share a little about my history and the reasons for this persistent line of inquiry. Some people would say, gosh, she's been doing, some aspect of this work for a long time. Now, today, that perspective will include the acknowledgement of other factors not generally included and discussed. Now, I believe Dr. Slore Defoe will be happy that I've stopped repressing particular themes, and along with reflections of my recent trip to South Africa last month, the more elaborated explanations of some of these themes that influence my work and remain cogent influences will definitely help to explain, why this persistent and continuing program of work. In the second section, you have to wait, hold on, Diane, and I'll tell you in a few minutes. You'll be happy. In the second section, given several decades of programmatic research and its application for youth between 3 years and late adolescence, my remarks and PowerPoint slides of data will highlight findings and lessons learned about the identity and development of diverse learners. Now, as suggested initially, and given our nation's preparations for Tuesday's election, I will especially highlight insights about youth, identity, and development of special relevance to an America post-Brown 1954. Today, in particular, presents a very special psychohistorical moment, and I've been calling it, in fact, a pregnant moment and special opportunity. I will not become political, so don't worry. However, I have to acknowledge the reality. Finally, the third section specifies why the assumptions of a colorblind society remain major problems relative to the design of teacher and training efforts, policy recommendations, and also social services implemented strategies. Now, this third section, rests on the assumption that all supports, if not adequate and reality-based, may not be experienced by our youth as indeed supportive. Did you hear me? If, in fact, they don't view the supports as representing what they need, then it's not going to help, and we've wasted a lot of resources. Now, in moving forward, I wish to first make a few remarks with observations about myself, a few shared insights about who I am and why this persistent focus on youth identity and human development evident in my work over the last several decades. Now, since I know that there are graduate students in the audience, I'll begin by acknowledging that an important aspect, and in fact, upside or positive aspect of entering a field without a prior disciplinary history is that you're not burdened by assumptions. As some of you already know about me, I entered this field as a graduate student from a quite narrow and specific undergraduate background. I not only lacked a social science academic history as an undergraduate student, but additionally possessed neither expectations for nor knowledge about the field's major paradigms, its great thinkers, nor its working assumptions. In fact, my non-traditional academic history included obtaining a solid grasp of basic laboratory science and math. However, given the nature of the lab training, I learned firsthand about the importance of keeping track and acknowledging the varied sources of experimental error to which our work was privy. At the same time, having responsibility for the condition of glasswork and supplies used in a gastroenterology research lab in the medical school, I learned the importance of potential contamination of lab techniques and findings if the most basic of habits are disregarded or not questioned. Now, in multiple ways, believe it or not, this very non-social science research training history alerted me to the problem of mixing apples and oranges or guarding against unfounded assumptions which skew interpretations. Now, in fact, learning about broad possibilities of errors and problems due to tricky assumptions that very often can contaminate findings served as then the context and history for my early work in the training and human development that I received. Now, as a new psychology department graduate student during the period of much civil unrest and protests concerning continuing injustices across America, my first social science study was markedly influenced by reading the publications of two particular social scientists, and they were Maney and Kenneth Clark. Now, needless to say, I was surprised by and initially influenced by the conclusions stated and underlying assumptions made from their work as the foundational social science supporting the Brown decision. In fact, 15 years following the court's 1954 ruling, and as a new social science researcher, I decided to replicate their work as my master's thesis at the University of Kansas. Importantly, two critical events happened to me during the implementation of the research project, which solidified my persistence during the interim 36 years. First event. You can't see that. That's my master's thesis up there. That's where the arrows are pointing to. You just can't see it. First event. I became a mother for the first time while I collected and analyzed these data. And there she is right there. Then and now. Stand up, Teresa. The second event, following the study's completion and an invited presentation to share my project with fellow graduate students and faculty, some of the feedback I found alarming. More to the point, I was startled by the responses and evident extreme uncomfortableness communicated by some of my peers in response to the research project's findings, which mirrored the Clark's work, and also my procedure, which required asking young children about color and color preferences. Now, as indicated, reactions of some of the graduate students were interesting and communicated significant discomfort. In fact, one asked why I would use drawings of black and white children, that perhaps showing the skin tone of the pictured children in blue skin tones would have been a better idea and less potentially anxiety-provoking. I had never forgotten the spirited discussion which followed, since it should have made evident to me exactly how much discomfort the topic generally communicates to adults. In fact, if I had been more discerning and reality-based at that time, the exchange might have suggested an alternative career path. Maybe I should have become a pediatrician or something, but certainly in this field, I was destined to cause significant discomfort. However, instead, given the assumptions made from the Clark's work and the clear set of ideas ignored, the situation for me instead ignited pure, unadulterated glee and excitement. I got a little reaction from the rats here, you know. That I was a lab person, so running rats was what we did. All right, little humor, Spencer special. I'm glad you're laughing, this is good. As suggested then, two events have spawned the intellectual commitment, becoming a mother myself and the inferences made about the Clark's research. However, before sharing a short DVD depicting the pattern of findings in the Clark's work and my own work, for decades after the Clark's work, I want to first highlight several additional sources of insights which have evolved from my own replications of that early work, and also the implications. Now, following that, and thanks to our IT support, Charles Washington, after sharing that, I will share a composite and short 6-minute DVD which demonstrates historical consistency and context-relevant character of American life for Black children. So first, I'm going to start by saying it's important that I recognize the huge impact of doctoral training at Chicago. The influences came both from professors and students. This included those that I argued with from the beginning of my training to its formal end. And I'm referring here, Dr. Soder, to our old colleague, Daniel G. Freeman. Now, although just recently deceased, I can say that the energetic and emotional debates with him have never abated my questioning about the extent and character of biological contributions to basic human development and human relations. It was in an early meeting, in fact, with one of my professors who was also my mentor, that was Edgar E. Epps, who had read my thesis project and had made the following comment. And what he said, in essence, is that I had demonstrated certain, if you will, racial attitudes and preferences for young kids, but those findings said nothing about their self-regard and self-esteem. Now, this is important because when the Clark's work was footnoted in the Supreme Court decision, the argument always taken was that segregation did harm, psychological harm to Black children. That was the focus. Now, as I mentioned, basically, Edgar Epps's insights and suggestions from other faculty and numerous courses allowed me to infer conclusions which continue to inform my work today, as suggested by the slides. Before moving into the next section of my remarks and the presentation of findings, I'd like to share a little bit of some of the work in terms of the slides. Okay, I think I can do this. Technology has my name in memory, and this always messes up. But before going there, let me say a few more things. Now let's just go to this. What I'd like to do is the following. In addition to my own research, there have been, several influences in my professional life that made a difference. And I will show the slides first, and then I will talk about some of those other influences. As I shared, I think Dr. Soder will find interesting, that I'm finally recognizing. So let me first of all show 9 minutes of 3 different videos. They've been cut down. Washington was magnificent. And then I will proceed to talk about what those data represent.
Press the forward button.
Okay. This is, thank you. See, let's give him my hand. I knew I was going to need this. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I've gotten ahead of myself. Mm-hmm. Now let me go back then. I could do it that way. Yeah. Okay. What I need to do is just to go ahead and keep to my notes and not get excited about showing you the DVDs. Okay, now, so I should go ahead and start and say, before going to section 2 and going to the video, I completed my dissertation at Chicago, and I was into my first job, and basically into doing research when several things happened. Yes. The first thing is that I was into my first job, and within the first year, I was rather lucky. I had my first NIMH grant funded. And I've always had these poor names for my projects. And this was MCEDR for short, Minority Child Developmental Research Project. And this was the first project that I had funded right out of graduate school, and it was a replication extension of my dissertation. This project included almost 300 3, 5, 7, 9-year-olds, and like the prior work, it included preschools, but for the first time, as a developmentalist, I was going to ask those questions as they influenced the experiences, or was reported as experiences for 7 and 9-year-olds. So that was the first project right out of graduate school. At the height of that project, when I was finishing up the first set of data collection, and people in Washington, therefore, had my first final report. That occurred in the early 1980s. I was then funded to follow up basically the first project because something rather unusual happened at the height of that work. There was a systematic killing of black children in Atlanta. So at the height of that work, basically NIMH refunded me to follow up my sample of kids who were now 6, 8, and 12-year-olds. And the data were important for me because they also indicated the importance of own group identification for children as a protective factor for them in terms of their psychological functioning. A third thing that happened is that I became aware of academic politics around issues of race. It became clear to me that senior people really felt as if, it wasn't clear why I would use a Chicago PhD to study black children. And also the second part of that third theme was that it became very clear that people in the field were being rather resistant to including black children in the study of human development from a normative and non-pathological perspective. And then, of course, as a family update, I now have 3 children and a husband. So basically what this does was to, give you a sense of, some of the things that were weighing on me during that time, but especially this whole issue of the missing and murdered child crisis. Okay, I was referring to Diana because she's always said that I've done a rather effective job repressing that whole period of my professional life. And not just a developmental scientist, but she's also a clinician, and she's right, and she's very, very correct about that. And I just want to share that it was only in getting ready for this and knowing that I wanted to also incorporate some of my more recent work on resiliency in my South Africa interview project that I began a month ago and spent quite a bit of the first 2 weeks of September interviewing people in South Africa and visited people all over in terms of Soweto and Johannesburg and Pretoria, and realized when I was in the museum, the Children's Museum in Soweto, how much that stuff was still with me. And in preparing for this presentation and wanted to just simply pose the question, given this psychohistorical moment, that this is a pregnant moment for us, not just in this country, but globally, to deal with the continuing problem of race and bias, not just here, but just global, but also globally. So what I wanted to do is to share a couple of slides that really depict, what that period was like, and also to share with you some of my experiences that represented an indelibly significant, factor in how and why I persisted doing this work for the subsequent decades. I was in Atlanta during that period, teaching at a university. What you have here, only about 9 of the over 20 children, mainly males, who were systematically found in odd places in Atlanta. It was a very, very trying period, which I obviously was very successful in repressing. And I realized in analyzing my thinking for today's presentation that I needed to do that. During this period, I played multiple roles. On the one hand, I had the ongoing role and responsibility to be an effective parent to my children and to protect them so they would assume that I was, their same old mother, even though inside I was just totally, just a wreck. Why I served on Commissioner Lee Brown's task force, and therefore was consistently involved in working with parents whose children had been killed, working with professionals in terms of training, helping people to help the most needy in our community. And on top of that, I still was engaged in doing the research funded by NIMH. And it was more of a schizophrenic experience than I've ever really described before, because I needed to put it out of my mind, because it was a very, very heinous period. It was most heinous for me as a mother, because the law enforcement initially did not want to recognize the fact that these parents were not killing their children. So not only were they finding bodies all over Atlanta, but they were wanting to blame the parents for this. And the more I was engaged in my research on the one hand over here, and working with people in the police department and people coming into the city, I realized that there were just different sets of information that, was being shared, and wanted to take all this in and be helpful while still maintaining some level of stability. On top of that, the research that we were doing on issues of children's identity and, sources of resilience, etc., occurred while we were interviewing and testing children who had cousins and relatives who were being found dead. We were literally working in communities where the bodies were being found and kids used to live. Again, it sort of, on the one hand, it awakened and reinforced, our recognition that, yes, context mattered, but in the course of engaging in normal human development for the older, now these were, don't forget, 8 and 6, 8, 10, and 12-year-olds, they were doing, engaging in activities for their parents, like going to the store, getting a loaf of bread, buying a bottle of milk, and they weren't coming home. They were engaging in normal human development activities and not coming home. And nobody was dealing with issues of context. That low resource context simply breeded, opportunism for people to, engage in deleterious activities with somebody's children. So in order to give you a sort of context for this, and on top of that, like I said, most importantly, I had to be, a stable mother. And I'm not sure the girls remembered this, but Chaz was a little boy, and he was a little boy, and majority of these bodies found were boys. And the girls were in soccer, and, I was there as a parent watching them play soccer, etc., but also having to watch this youngster, my son, running around playing. And I can honestly tell you that, trying to function in almost a schizophrenic fashion, give an impression that everything is fine, but on the other hand, having too much information. So as I shared, Diane will be happy to know, I sort of recognize this as my way of coping, but also I would say this, our productive way of responding has been to simply stay focused. So, the work has not been at all, boring or whatever, because I simply keep taking it to another level, because I know that there are issues that are never addressed when it comes to kids of color, about the context. Just to give you a little bit of the history. Okay, so with that, now I can go forward and I can hit the special key. Which one should I hit?
Just click, move the cursor to
Cursor.
click here on your mouse.
On this, and I'm ready. I don't trust myself. Technology says, Margaret's on, let's mess up. That's the way it goes. I understand it. I know who I am. So we'll see 3 vignettes together. We'll see the first one, that's the Atlanta Missing Murder Child Crisis, and then we'll see ABC special Black and White America that undergirds the continuing salience of race, and then more recent one.
And nobody's bothering you, right?
Making a statement for the children and what's to come. And it's just real important for them to realize that you do what you think is important, what you want to do, and you get the right. All of a sudden we heard this explosion, and we turned around, the ground shook, and all we saw was smoke, and we just stood there in stunned silence. But I think just to make the point, there's so much of what I'm trying to instead of it, actually get home, that it won't work, everybody gathers.
Stop there because I don't think they've really done a good job of presenting all the pieces, but we figured that this will at least give you a sense of it, just the situation that was going on at that time. The other piece I want to share with you is that in terms of this whole period, give me 1 second, is that they arrested one person, as you're well aware, Wayne Williams, and they convicted him on just a small number of the killings. But anybody who was there at the time, was really evidence to most people, they couldn't have done it alone. These were, 10, 12-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-olds in some cases, and this was a very small man, a photographer, and he basically could not have done it alone. So the bottom line in terms of what you were seeing here is that there were lots of other data available that never saw the light of day. So on that note, the point here is that, the message here is that black children, their disposable character as viewed by many people in charge is still basically a problem in this country. The next video clip really is separated by, I guess, almost, let's say 14, 16, 17 years. The first one's Black and White America, that followed on the work that we've been doing for a while, and a more recent one by this young filmmaker, Kyra Davis. And the data are the same in terms of, how black kids are picking up and negative valuations of them and how they respond when you ask them about their experiences. Thank you, Charles. See, Howard's the master of this. He's my teacher, but I'm not a good student.
Dr. Margaret Beale Spencer is one of several researchers who has studied this. She shows pictures to black children ages 3 to 12, pictures of black and white characters. They have identical facial features, hair, and clothing. The only difference is skin color. Dr. Spencer asks the children to choose.
Ajiva, I have a picture now of two girls, and everyone says that one girl is very pretty. Which is the pretty girl?
F.
Can you tell me why?
Because she had different skin, and I like the way she dresses.
Oh, okay. Point to the ugly girl for me. Can you tell me why she's the ugly girl?
Because everybody hits her and they don't like her.
Oh, goodness, okay. Chandler, can you tell me which is the dirty boy? Can you tell me why?
Because he's not the same color he's supposed to be.
Oh, okay. All right. Come on and have a seat. Okay? Now, my research started 20 years ago, and here today in 1989, the stereotypes are still in place. Stereotypes which suggest that black people are very negative generally, not very bright, not very attractive, etc. And that whites are still all these very positive things and those things alone. Ebony, how are you today? It means for me that we have not come very far as the people. Okay, what's associated with color white in society? Power.
I want you to buy 20,000 shares of Blue Star at 15 1/8, 3/8 tops.
Attractiveness. Black children watch more TV, unfortunately, than any other minority group. And they're bombarded there for all these fast-paced images, which for the most part leaves them invisible. They don't see themselves, and they're not even aware of it.
Maggie's got the best hair.
Which is the pretty girl?
The one on the right most likely.
The one on the right most likely, and why would you say that?
Well, to me, she has the prettiest hair.
For older children who are now at a point in their thinking that they understand that what they are saying is in conflict with how they feel about themselves, it's very difficult.
It's hard.
I didn't hear you.
This is hard.
Oh, it's hard? You can virtually see the anxiety on their faces.
I can't decide.
And it hurts. You know, as a researcher, as a mother, as a citizen in this country, it really hurts, you know, given where we claim we are as a nation. Okay, that's fine. Now, why is that one the dirty boy?
Because you can't tell whether he's dirty or not because he's black.
Boys and girls, today we're going to play a game. It's a game about building a dream. Name 7 black leaders. Martin Luther King, let's do one at a time. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass.
Point to the smart boy for me.
Most likely be him
Okay, now why is he the smart boy?
because he looks very, very smart.
point to the picture for me. Okay, very good. Now tell me, why is she the very pretty girl, Denise?
Because she's black and she's beautiful.
Because she's what?
She's black and she's beautiful.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you like to play with?
This one. I like that one. I can. This one.
That one?
This one. I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
She's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you give, and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
Okay, thank you, Charles. I should note that the portion of the video clip filmed by ABC with preschoolers as Black and White America was taped in 1989, and that was a full 35 years after the Brown decision. The second modified videotape clip by the 18-year-old filmmaker Kyra Davis was completed as noted in 2005, obviously a full 66 years following the publication of the Clark's original 1939 study. That's a full 51 years following the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, and still the patterns are parallel. Now, the consistency of the taped observations and empirical data obtained suggests both lessons learned and obviously some missed opportunities. When, as I shared, current work in South Africa sort of reminded me of, as a global phenomenon, the role of color in the lives of people around the globe. Basically, as black children are treated as disposable. The Soweto Children's Museum really dictates and describes very clearly basically the sort of abuses of children that occurred in South Africa. And it's solely because, they were black. My point here is that we still have a lot of work to do, and things have not changed very much even after the Brown decision. I had generated this little timeline to kind of describe, given Du Bois' sort of seminal statement in 1902, that the color line, would be, in essence, the issue of the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century, and obviously issues of color remain. And so given these themes, if you will, that's basically why I continue to work on these issues to figure out, either, how can we support children in terms of building resources to, in essence, have them be more, if you will, proactively responsive to these conditions, or in essence, change the context. So it's really indicated here, all the various and important events that have happened over the last 100 years. What I added today was to talk about the importance of this McCedar research project, because this was the first project when I ended up finding out, given this heinous fact of the killing of black children in Atlanta, that I found that the earlier study, those children who had a cultural identity that was Afrocentric, were able to handle this heinous crime more effectively. And that was the first time that I had a hint, a good 20 plus years ago, about this extreme protective character of own group cultural identity. So it gives one a real head start in terms of what to do. So certainly Howard's work makes a huge difference in demonstrating what we need to do more generally to help kids feel, if you will, more protected in these situations. The other things I shared is this more current work in South Africa. The stories of resilient people interviewing says the very same thing, that although one's cultural identity matters, there are other sources of identity that also can serve as protectives. So this kind of gives you a timeline of basically influences from my career. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is to talk about data. Show me the data. That's Spencer's line. All right, so for the last several decades, I've been engaging in a lot of work, and basically the work comes out of the early work by Kenneth Mayhew Clark, and certainly the work by the McAdoos later on, and Williams, etc. And the strategies are all very similar in that for young children, you have a similar animal that differs only in color, and you ask about, if you will, some characteristic. Are they nice? Are they kind? Are they clean? Are they smart? Etc. And the point of these lines here is simply to tell us that ideas about color are very much infused in our culture. I mean, I'm noticing this in the last several weeks in particular, that the use of darkness and black, etc., in very pejorative ways has been, basically very much a part of American culture given this current decline of the stock market. So basically the strategy is very simple. You see two animals that are identical and you say, okay, here's one dog, which is the ugly dog, or is it a person, which is a nice person, a nice dog, as illustrated. Now, the data that's been collected over several decades have been very, very consistent. What we found is that in terms of what we have to do, is that color concepts are established early, as young as 3 years of age. And kids report their knowledge very consistently, and that it's learned, like for example through language, but it can be changed, and that African American and white children are generally in this country pretty Eurocentric in terms of color concepts, attitudes, and preferences rather early, and that early concepts about color and race are not related to self-esteem. That's extremely important. One of my early applications of the Clark's work, was a 130 sample research project, and basically it was a preschool project, and the data were very consistent with my prior project, which is that the majority of children, that is 80%, were very Eurocentric in terms of values, but they had high self-regard, and that's important. Similarly, in another study, we found the very same thing. If you divide the kids into not quartiles, but in groups of 6, the kids here are positive self-regard, and these are low self-regard. The majority of the preschoolers will feel good about themselves and also be Eurocentric. Why? Because they're smart and know how the country operates in terms of values. They pick it up, they hear it, you ask the question, they'll give you the right answer from their point of view. As I shared a minute ago, this McCedar project that was conducted in Atlanta occurred in 2 parts. The first part occurred in 78 to 81, and the height of the missing and murdered child crisis, the kids were followed up. And we had many more measures in this study. The preschooler data was the same. The majority of the children were very Eurocentric, but they also had positive self-esteem. When we looked at the same sample, but of primary grade children, what was very evident to us for the first time is that as kids grow older, they can't take in those biases without also considering what it means for self. So we found for the first time that as kids grow older, they readjust their views of their group, no matter what they're exposed to in the environment. So what we found is that, the American cultural stereotypes are strongly held in the preschool years, but for mental health reasons, as children grow older, they have to informally learn, if you will, what they had learned in terms of biases about their own group membership. So what this says then is that on the one hand, we say we're really concerned with cognitive development and achievement, but we don't also acknowledge that when kids are learning and using the cognitive domain, they're also learning about stereotypes that are not true. So if they want to maintain their self-esteem, they've got to change how they feel about blackness and how it's handled in this society. It's not just African Americans, we're going to focus on them initially. So this shift in racial identity, it's important for older kids, and it has implications in terms of cognition. These kids are no longer egocentric. Now they're smarter. They can have reciprocal points of view, and it matters around issues of stigma and bias. They have to change how they feel about the group in order to maintain their positive self-concept. The next replication of this work came in 89-94. This is a 5-year longitudinal study. As I shared, I'm full of bad acronyms. PAC in this case stood for the Promotion of Academic Competence. The earlier work that took place during the missing and murdered child crisis taught me that there are protective factors that we need to identify and therefore maximize in order to have healthier kids. So in this project, the Project for the Promotion of Academic Competence, we were concerned with youngsters who were males for the most part, and we were looking at their development during another critical period, and that is adolescence. Again, we had a variety of measures. What we found in terms of major findings is that youth who perceived their teachers as having positive expectations of their ability were 3 times more likely to graduate. Now that's huge. Because part of cognitive development means being able to read other people's points of view. On the other hand, those who perceive their teachers as not liking them too much were 4 times more likely to drop out of school. Those are pretty, I think, compelling findings. In terms of high school completion, the data also were very, I think, enlightening in that it said that youth higher in positive black identity, that is their own group identity, were almost 5 times more likely to graduate than those who were less positively identified. Youth higher in perceived white precedent, meaning that they viewed whites as being superior to blacks, were more likely to drop out of school. Youth were more likely to drop out of school than perceived whites as being superior and more valued as Americans. They endorsed the notion that blacks are not as smart as whites or attractive as whites. And they believe that whites express themselves better than blacks. And they also subscribe to this view that blacks should become part of the white world, i.e. the black world has no value. And again, these are adolescent data. So the point here is that preschoolers make meaning of the world in one way, primary school kids make meaning of the world in a particular way, and by adolescence, kids are rather clear. So in our current project, and I wanted to publicly thank Dr. Torch Lytle for his support in this project. At the time, he was the superintendent of Trenton Public Schools. That this project took place here. It was a 5-year longitudinal project and included both a Philadelphia sample and also a Trenton sample. Again, this was an adolescent sample. This was the first sample that had a decent proportion of non-black students, all focused on issues of identity and achievement. As noted, the stats are here in terms of demographics. Now, for the first time, we have been struggling with issues of skin color assessment for a long time. Initially, there were very, very few good ways of measuring skin color. So at the time, we had a graduate student whose husband was a graphic artist, so my students know no one is sacred. So he was able to help us generate what we have come to call the VISTA, the Visual Inventory for Skin Tone Assessment. It's a skin color opinion and perceptions evaluation measure. So what we do in this case is that we ask children, youth, to identify where they are on this bar. So you might be down this end if you're white, Asian, or even Latino, and or black, or wherever you are, you have to first simply say, where are you on this skin color bar? A straightforward question. I'm going to give you a little bit of data on this measure, but the dissertation you should look forward to is Taisha Goss. Taisha Goss should finish her dissertation this semester, ideally, or the very outside next, has done a rather magnificent job looking at issues of skin color assessment and other measures. So what we did then was to ask the kids to find themselves on the measure, and then basically to identify where they might like to be if they could, change their skin color, okay? So there were two kinds of responses that were possible. A response is that where they identified as self and where they would prefer to be, they had an option. We call that a consonant or consistent response. And then a dissonant response is one where they identify where they are, but they say they would like a skin tone that is different. So dissonant, we have that, okay? Consonant or dissonant. So what we have then is looking at self-perception responses by skin color satisfaction. For example, in this case, we had measures of perceived unfavorable teacher ratings or body image satisfactions are very important ideas for kids, adolescents, and positive self-attitudes and fear of calamity. And this measure, kids who are dissonant, they more often perceive unfavorable teacher perception. So of course we don't know what came first. The teacher perceptions or basically, the kids, responding to their own feelings. So it's always that chicken and egg issue. In terms of body image satisfaction, this is very important that kids who are consonant, they also feel very good about their bodies. They have some degree of satisfaction. And given the significant number of eating problems in adolescents, we think this is extremely important. Positive self-attitudes, self-regard, etc. Again, kids who are consonant, they have a better self-attitude than kids who basically are dissonant. What's important here for me in terms of the work under these unusual conditions is that kids who are dissonant also feel all the time that something adverse is going to happen. So it's hard to focus, I should think, on your work when you're always concerned about when the other shoe is going to drop. So there's basically, we think, a developmental progression in terms of these ideas and their implications, obviously, for what kids are doing and how confident they're able to perform. Color and race are discernible by preschoolers, have salience in very unique ways throughout adolescence, and race and skin color, they still matter for ego development processes for middle childhood, adolescence, and it's also important for healthy coping behavior. Now, recent insights from South Africa interview data, really have been very helpful to me, and again, rethinking about our data, and that is children's, perceived and experienced challenges matter for their political attitudes. If you're living in a situation where you know that people like you may be devalued, it has implications for how you feel about your country or how you feel about citizenship or basically your political views concerning where you live. Youth political beliefs have been frequently, I think, associated with evolving experiences of inequality more directly. Now, the sample descriptions, again, as I showed a few minutes ago, Philadelphia and Trenton are side by side. These are subsamples by city. And when we look at Philadelphia and skin color preference, what's really interesting here, these are data that are pretty recent. You can look at all four ethnicities, and it's really very evident that in terms of skin tone preference, generally kids really prefer either being their same skin color or lighter. Similarly, for the Trenton study, now the problem with this data set is that we have very few Asians in Trenton, so that group is very much underrepresented. Similarly, for our sample, we didn't have very many whites. But the bottom line, though, is that the data look the same in terms of preference, either the same or lighter. Kids are not preferring to be darker. So what's interesting then is that when you also ask very pointedly, well, which skin color would you least prefer? So by ethnicity, the issue is the same, that you have kids, for the most part, choosing for least preferred a darker skin tone. So you ask it one way or the other, the data are the same, color matters still in this country. In Trenton, the pattern is the same. If you ask kids about, which would be their least preferred race, preferred, in essence, color, as a function of ethnicity, the data are the same. Being darker is not preferred. So even though kids are uncomfortable articulating the why of it, they know in their gut, what works and what does not. Adolescents are pretty smart. So our political attitude survey, we basically use Connie Flanagan's measure, and we, of course, scaled it for our sample. We ended up with a 3-factor solution, and then there were 2 items that were still independent items, but they seemed to be very, very important for our sample. So the 3 subscales that had very good alphas, over 0.7, were inequality, that is unfulfilled institutional promises, equality and fairness, and anger, futility. Now, I think this whole political attitude issue is important because we know that issues of cultural identity are important, but to the extent of fairness, kids, as you well know, adolescents in particular, feel the whole world's against them anyway. But to the extent that they also feel that there's a degree of inequality, that's pretty darn important in terms of getting them to, model what we want them to model in terms of our behavior and take on beliefs and attributes that we think are important for their success. So there are 3 subscales, as I shared: inequality, equality, fairness, anger, futility, an economic apartheid item, and a 1 hope item. He called it economic apartheid because I thought it was so extreme that the question was, in essence, unfairness of economic extremes, kind of what we're talking about now politically in the press. I won't say anything more about that. Who gets the tax break? And of course, hope, which is also always important. Okay, so we looked at differences in political attitudes by race within city. There were no real differences in political attitudes among Black, Latino, and multiracial youth in Trenton. But we did, in essence, for Philadelphia, see differences in perceived equality, fairness by race. What's really evident here is that let me make sure I'm doing this right. I get all caught up in the data and forget my notes. These look like they're very close, but we still have very significant differences in terms of findings. For example, sorry, just give me a second. Ask me to cool down a little bit also. It's warm up here. Okay, so for Philadelphia, as I shared, we did have differences in perceived equality by race. In this case, the differences was basically less than 0.001. In this case, we had both the Asian and white students were different than the Black students. That's the green bar here. Now, for Philadelphia, we also found differences in anger and futility by race. In this case, we had the 3rd group, Latinos, who surprisingly, this is interesting, but I'll go back to this in a second, but they had a significantly higher, if you will, fairness and equality score, anger and futility by race score. And they were more, in essence, they were higher than the other groups. I'm not going to present it because my colleagues telling me I had too much data, but for the most part, the Latino data is represented mainly by females. It was really very interesting that anger and futility was much often expressed by females than by males. In Philadelphia, there were also differences in hope by race. Again, our Black students were lowest in terms of having a sense of hope, and the multiracial students were highest in terms of feeling a sense of hopefulness. When we looked at this other, it's basically differences in political attitudes by skin color preference. Don't forget, we have these 2 groups. We have dissonance and we have consonance. For equality, fairness, what's interesting here is that there are differences at the 0.01 level, but it's really the kids who were dissonant who had a higher sense of, more significant sense of equality, fairness than the kids who were consonant. And that continues to surprise me. We've not quite unpacked this yet. Similarly, at the same time, for the subscale inequality, similarly, kids who were dissonant generally basically had a higher level of expressed inequality. Now, for multiracial students and skin color, when we looked at hope, in this case, it was the students who were consonant who were more hopeful. Racial, they were multiracial sample. So if I'm presenting just one group, it means that the other groups may not have been significant. Differences by skin color for our black students, similarly, we had the very same pattern for equality fairness, that the dissonant students who were black basically had were more in essence, there were more sharing of beliefs concerning equality and fairness than kids who were consonant. On the other hand, for inequality, the black students who were dissonant felt that there was more inequality. We also have interesting findings as a function of immigration status. Now, again, I'm going to say very little about these data because this is Cleo Jacobs' dissertation. She's not looking at skin color, but she is looking at immigration status in a variety of ways. So both these dissertations are going to be quite elegant, so I'm really excited about them. Now, there are fewer than expected immigrant youth and more than expected non-immigrant youth who are consonant in their skin color. Conversely, there are more than expected immigrant youth and fewer than expected non-immigrant youth who are dissonant in their skin color. So this gets really pretty complex. The bottom line in terms of what I can say about these data is that it's really very apparent that skin color still continues to matter in this country. And the current period represents certainly a pregnant moment to deal with some of these issues. The work in developmental psychopathology by researchers such as Sumia Luthar is extraordinarily helpful in bringing to bear issues of whiteness for white children. That these are issues that generally developmental scientists don't talk about. However, critical race theorists like Derek Bell, Richard Delgado, along with others, have a great deal to offer us as developmental scientists and educational researchers. In fact, one critical race theorist and journalism professor at UTexas invites ideas about new constructs for examining the contributing problem of white privilege that contributes to our not having a colorblind society. He says that it's really important for people who are white to face that very often one's possessions are unearned. So what does that mean? He said also confronting the potential consequences for whites if economic, political, and social systems become more just and equitable. What does that mean if one's entire sense of self is dependent upon having more? He says that being treated in ways similar to historical treatment of non-whites might be an issue. And coping with a world where white monopolized power is reversed to non-whites is potentially a source of fear, but they should be issues that we're addressing as developmental scientists. Nagging concern, he says, by whites about the discernibility of their racist thoughts by others should again be issues that we were addressing developmentally. And being inadequately understood or unable to share one's views concerning justice, should be an issue that, we address in terms of themes that make sense for whites. From the preschool data shared to the virtual voices of adolescents, these are issues which are articulated and actively resisted while being reported as disparity outcomes in fields of relevance to human development and human functioning, including health, education, economics, criminal justice, and social services. It seems to me that if the Brown decision was designed to right the wrongs of history, a still nagging need is to acknowledge the fact of humanity generally ignored for some of America's citizens and the problem of risk and vulnerability associated with white privilege are issues which continue to be ignored. However, when one contemplates the undergirding science and insights needed for major societal change, one can only conclude that this situation is not rocket science. Husband hears that all the time, right? These observations suggest that at the national policy level, my colleagues in the policy division, that the national policy level relative to needed education research and informed policy, it's not enough to dedicate resources to the hiring of thousands of teachers. More important, it appears critical to confront training programming which ensures that teachers and administrators acknowledge the values of the families and the youth themselves, as well as to recognize their own fears surrounding unacknowledged privilege and attendant identity problems. Confronting these risks is a critical component for delivering on the responsibilities attached to the education of not only our own children around the dinner table, but also other people's children as well. Thank you very much. We have some questions? Darnie says we have time for one or two questions? Okay. Q&A? Any questions or comments? Yes.
Were any of the doll tests performed on white children? I was wondering if there's what the data is for their perceptions of color.
Right. In fact, my initial study included both black and white children. And the only difference was that white children were generally more adamant and clear. Because what we did, I had three people working with me, so we divided up the sample in order not to have that bias. What's interesting in the kids that I tested, even at the preschool level, I love preschool work because kids are so honest. You ask a question, they give you an answer. And so you would ask, for our baseline condition, what we did was to ask the questions about skin color preference, etc., who's smart, who's not so smart, who's clean, etc. And all the kids, black and white, for the most part, they were all Eurocentric. The white children seemed clearer about this than black children, but the data generally were the same. What's interesting is that in order to always get extra data during the pilot period, we would ask the children questions like, okay, Johnny, you say, okay, Johnny, here are two children had an artist do a rendition of identical kids. Here are two children who are identical except for skin color, same dresses, same shoes, only different skin color. We'd say, okay, Johnny, this is a white child, and I remember these data. Why is this one the clean girl? Okay? And they were identical. And she would say things like, well, it's because, it's like a little black kid said, I like the dress she's wearing, but that was an older kid. The 3-year-olds would say, well, the shoes are not the same. Those shoes are icky. Those shoes or that dress is this, and they were identical. So what the kids were doing was telling you that I know this, so I need to find an explanation for it, but I know it. And what's wonderful about all of it, they would answer your questions as if you were the dummy. And that's why I always love preschoolers, because they tell you the truth. But what we also found in terms of that first study is that we basically asked the children, we got baseline, about their values and attitudes and preferences. And then we used a mechanized token dispenser. I was at Kansas, okay, at the time, all right? It was experimental psychology, bastion, so that's what we did. So we built a reinforcement contraption with two mechanized dolls, puppets. And they looked like Frederick Douglass, except one was black and one was white. So after getting baseline, and we understood the majority of the kids were Eurocentric. Then these are preschoolers, so we had toys and candy that they could trade in tokens to get the candy, etc. Then we would use this social reinforcer and say, okay, after they would answer the question and get it wrong, we'd say, okay, now Sam or Paul Douglas here thinks that that's not the right answer. And so when you give the right answer, they'll stand up in their seats and tell you, and also give you a gift. What we're able to demonstrate is that these socially learned beliefs about color and race and ethnicity could be also socially changed with reinforcement. So in that initial study, we were able to demonstrate that kids know what they know, but with a little incentive, they can unlearn what they've learned, okay? And that was powerful, because it says that, children don't come here pre-wired and pre-programmed to be biased, that they learn those behaviors, and with the appropriate models or incentives, they can be unlearned. That's in the preschool years. And things become a bit more complex when kids enter the primary years and certainly adolescence. Does that answer the question? Other questions or comments? Yes?
Did you break it down by gender and SES?
In terms of, well, let's see. SES has never been, I'm sorry? We broke it down by SES, and but what's interesting about SES in terms of how you break it down, the data are interesting in that kids who are impoverished. We broke our sample into 3 parts in Atlanta. You know, kids who were closer to the middle class, and kids who were low income, but kind of like right on the cusp, and then kids like in our most recent study who were really very low resourced. What we found is that middle group who was not quite so low resource, but they could almost see opportunity, they outperformed the middle income kids. Because it was like their parents knew they had to put a little bit more in to push them over. And in that case, class did make a difference. In our current work that we're still analyzing data from the Alpha Project, those data are interesting because there are 2 groups of kids. There are kids who are very high performing and kids who are not or marginally performing. These are CD kids. And in that study, everybody was low resource. You had to meet in essence a criterion to get in. Why? Because the point of the study was to show resiliency even within a low resource community of kids. And in that project, we've been able to show, of course, is that even if all the kids are poor, that kids are still able to do well if they have enough supports. Out of all this work, what I did not mention is that it's all sort of fed into a new way of thinking about human development, and the theoretical framework is called PVES for short. I told you I'm full of that acronym. It stands for a phenomenal logical variant of ecological systems theory. Okay, all right, I know. Oh, Lord is right. Okay, why that? Because I wanted people to stumble over it. I wanted people to stumble over the words phenomenological. The point of that very, very long-standing psychological, if you will, or social science term is to simply say that people's own perceptions matter. And for some reason in the social sciences, we have discounted people's own perceptions. It's like starting in 1939 with Clark's early work. The assumption was if black kids choose the white doll as being ugly, bad, or whatever, it must mean that black kids hate themselves. That was imposing, in that case, adult reasoning on children's meaning making. So I thought it was really important for people to know that phenomenology matters, that how the individual thinks and makes sense of the world matters. And you have to get that first. So that's the first part of the theory, phenomenological variant of ecological systems theory, saying that ecology matters. The context matters. And we've known this for years. The early studies on ecology were done in the 40s and early 50s, both in this country and also in Europe, by our own ecological psychologists. Herb Wright, Barker, Paul Guck, all these people were doing research demonstrating the role of the environment on human behavior. And it's been ignored when it came to black children. The only thing that the Brown decision could conclude was that, given these United States and given the science on which the footnote was based, suggested that, black kids left to their own devices in their black communities can only have and experience self-hatred. So it was the best that they could do at the time. What they understood was that segregation had to change in this country, and that was the best science that they had, and they used it. But what happened in using that social science to undergird the Brown decision is continued a misinterpretation of psychological processes and potential in black kids. And that's a serious problem. So the theory, PVES, what it says is that all humans are vulnerable. All humans are vulnerable, thank you. Not just dark people, not just poor people, but all humans are vulnerable. But instead, that vulnerability says that all humans have both protective factors and they have risk factors. And the point here is that the balance between the two. In the case of being black or a person of color in this society, it means that there are a lot more risk factors. People never thought that means that you've got to afford more supports to offset the risk factors. They simply identify people only as risk and never as basically having protective factors also. So I've evolved this theory of human development called PVES to accommodate the diversity of the experiences of all youngsters as a way of moving forward, if you will, programmatic efforts to provide the kinds of supports that make a difference. And Clayton lectures being supported by co-sponsors, but also by the Grad School of Education. So I would say to all of you who are invested in education, as I started off my lecture this afternoon, support is not supported if it's not perceived and experienced as such. Which means then that what we do in terms of teacher training, what we do in terms of our administrative training, has to represent, if you will, equally experienced supports. If the so-called supports represent only one part of the classroom, it's not going to help the other part. It means it leaves our job as a much more difficult task. So what I would say in closing, in terms of recognizing the importance of new ways of thinking about human development in context for everybody's children, we need to change because it's in everybody's best interest. It makes us perform in a more competent manner as professionals if we're providing supports that make sense to children. There is no reason to complain about the achievement gap when in fact we are the source for part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.